on time. We're like 3 minutes late. But John Pearce, it's kind of like an overflow crowd at Texas A&M College Station in a football game. So we have a capacity crowd here tonight, and you sold out the place. So the expectations are pretty large for you. Anyway, my name is Ron Robinson, and I have the privilege of being the chairman of the World War II History Roundtable, the Audie Murphy Chapter. And behind me is the Audie Murphy portion of this museum. And as soon as this program is over, while Mr. Pearce is signing books and autographing books that he's got here for sale, we are going to pull the curtain up, and those of you who haven't seen the Audie Murphy portion of this museum, we invite you to see it. It's the finest collection of Audie Murphy memorabilia in the world. It's right behind the screen. So we encourage those of you from out of town to take a look. I want to recognize Alliance Bank, who is our Charter Gold sponsor tonight. Great bank here in town. And the museum banks there. I bank there. The museum director banks there. And the rumor is he gives away money. Paul Pater, would you stand up? And let's give Paul a round of applause. He says he's out of money. Here in the audience is also charter members of this organization. Charter members pay $25 or more a year to help with the general expenses of this program. The Charter Gold members, it's $500 per program, and we only have one Charter Gold member per program. So Charter Gold tonight, as I said, is Alliance Bank. I want to recognize the gentleman over here on the left, or on your right, Matt Middleton. Matt, most of them can't see you, but
that's a good thing.
Matt is with Greenville Electric Utility Services, and this program is being filmed by Greenville Electric Utility Services in Greenville. Is called Geus. So that's pretty neat, isn't it? The electricity is called Geus here. And Matt is doing the filming, and you will be able to see this program. Actually, it's being shown today in real time. Matt?
Kind of.
What do you call it? What's the right word?
YouTube.
Huh?
YouTube.
Okay.
Streaming.
But you'll be able to get up on YouTube and see the recording of this program. All of our programs, roundtable programs, are recorded and put up on YouTube for people to see for years to come. I want to recognize Kristen Still and Susan Lanning. They're both back in the back, and Susan is the director of this museum, has been here for many years, does an outstanding job, and it's her job to communicate with the surviving members of the Audie Murphy family to stay on top of what's going on with everything Audie Murphy. Her trusted deputy is Kristen Still, and she's back in the back. She's also taping, and she runs the sound system. And so if you see her walking forward and the sound's not right, it's going to be Kristen coming up and going back over there and try to fix the sound system. So anyway, they do a great job, and we're thankful that they let us use the facility for the roundtable. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We are independent from the Audie Murphy Museum, but we have a working relationship with them. And we have a board of directors that's totally different from the museum's board. As soon as Mr. Pearce finishes his presentation, there will be a Q&A session. And one of our board members, Kristen White, will have a microphone. You'll raise your hand, and she'll come to you, and so everybody can hear your question. So that will go on immediately afterward. And again, as I mentioned, we're going to open the curtain just as soon as the program is over. Out in the lobby, next to the cash register, is where John will be, and his books will be, and he's willing to autograph them for you. And they're for sale, and they'll have the price and everything out there. If any of you are interested in becoming a charter member and going and getting emails from us and helping to support this organization, charter memberships of $25 or more can be paid in cash or check or credit card at the cash register out front as soon as this is over with. Also, you have two pieces of literature in front of you. The black piece, Johnny and he put together for this program, and it's got a significant amount of information in there. And one of the things to look at, if all of you haven't seen it, is the list of the 36 division members from the cities of Northeast Texas, including Sulphur Springs, Commerce, and Greenville, and there's other cities in there also, towns I should say. So make sure you look at that. Somebody here may have known the daughter or the granddaughter of one of these veterans who was in the war. So there's in the smaller program that you have, the white one, is what we call the Roundtable printed program. In the middle is a pull-out sheet. Please fill that sheet out and turn it in as you leave. Why? Because you're giving us feedback of how we can do a better job of selecting programs for the Roundtable. Please do that for us, and you can drop those off at the cash register as you leave. We have pencils in the back. If you didn't arrive with a pencil, we have them back there on the table, and you can fill them out as you leave. All right. With all that being said, let me introduce to you the first vice chairman of the board of directors. He's a co-first vice chairman who will introduce John Pearce. And the other vice chairman is out of the country. His name is John Scruggs. It is Skip who spends almost all of his time working with the speaker, gathering information, and making sure we take care of that speaker when he's here now. John and his wife are spending the night in the community, and we take care of that for them, and we try to make sure that we make them as comfortable as they can while they're visiting Greenville. Now, Skip Steele is a unique man. He is a historian, and there's 2 or 3 historians on this board, but not many historians, not many at Commerce, not many at Texas A&M University and College Station has written 30 books. He has. And he's an expert on World War II. He wrote the definitive book on the admiral that preceded husband Kimmel, at Pearl Harbor. And he was there before Kimmel, and he got fired by President Roosevelt. He wrote the book about it. Why? He was from Paris, Texas, and that's where Skip's from. Without further ado,
there's always a link.
give Skip Steele a nice warm welcome. Skip, come up and introduce John.
Thank you. John reminded me of a few things in life. When I originally talked with him, I thought I'd been part of a couple of big events in the world. I sat underneath a car in 1966 and watched bullets fly by. I guess that was the first massive killing in the United States, probably. But John reminded me I'd done something else. I stood in the football stadium at Sulphur Springs on a cold winter night. We'd had a terrible season. We hadn't lost to Sulphur Springs in 26 years? 27 years. And that's my senior year. You know, we lost, but John played a good game. I think all of you probably have some kinfolk in the 36th Division, which basically started with Texas. You know, the guys thought they could get an extra $50 probably a month by signing up in 1939, and they only had to train for maybe twice a month. And then all of a sudden, the draft comes along, and they decide to bring them all up, and they go down to Brownwood, and they can only come home on weekends now to see their people, and they do that for nearly a year. They finally worked their way to North Africa, and I really enjoyed, and I think you probably can too, reading the diaries of his father. And then John links them together so you'll know the history of what's happening. Our previous program was on the generals who were making those decisions, and it was kind of fun to watch what they decided what these poor guys were going to have to do. I had a friend that was in the 135th Infantry, and they were down below Monte Cassino a day, up until a day that they bombed it, and they replaced them, and the poor guys that took their place got hit by the American bombs that wiped out the Monte Cassino. And I also have, and I hope all of you that were in the Navy do it, go find your ancestors' boat or ship logs, and then you can put them together in chronological order. And I watched what my father did while John's father was on land. My dad was out in the Mediterranean trying to sink all the subs that were coming by. Not many of them, but they fired on a few. But anyway, John did what we all want to do, and he put together his father's diary, and kind of like a lot of other fathers we have, that's all he wrote, right? Yeah, he wrote one beautiful thing. And most diaries are kind of a drag. I did a diary of Sally Chisholm and put them all together. She had 29 different diaries, and I merged them all together so people could research her life through the way. But her stuff was pretty boring about what she ate that morning or whether it snowed that night. But if you'll look at the movie G.I. Joe, which I didn't discover until my brother pointed it out a few days ago. It's about Ernie Pyle, and it's got Robert Mitchum playing a captain. And I'll be darned, that thing shows you what Frank was seeing when they were below the mountains and the various Monty whatevers that they were fighting on. And of course, the other men were coming into Anzio, and they were following some of them, and it was wild. Anyway, John pieced all this together for us, and we sure appreciate you being here. I know you coast everywhere in the world, but we'll learn that later. So, thank you.
I think did that do it? You got me?
Is it green?
First, I want to apologize. My voice. I was over at Texas A&M Commerce today, met with a couple of groups. Wonderful time. The history department, Dr. Kowalski showed me around, and I talked too much. And so I would talk as loud as I can. I'm excited about being here. Just to have the World War II Roundtable consider me to be over here is something special to me. And then to look around and be in the Audie Murphy Museum and a building named after Audie Murphy. My dad was in the 36th Infantry Division, and Audie Murphy was in the 3rd. And they basically fought side by side, or either replaced each other all through the war. And so my dad thought of Audie Murphy as a hero, and anytime something was written about Audie Murphy, my dad could relate to it. So, and I guess my brother back here, John A Pearce, is also here. When we were in I believe the 3rd grade, I was in the 3rd grade, Jerry was in the 2nd, and I'll let you follow along with these deals I put in your programs. This is an advertisement from the Mission Theater in Sulphur Springs in October of '55. But my daddy wanted us to see Audie Murphy. And by him doing this movie, he had to get us in. Again, 3rd grade. I'm not sure if it was a school night or not, but we were there. And after that, I think over the next, at least the late 50s and early 60s, we never missed an Audie Murphy movie when it came through Sulphur Springs. But I was very impressed at that time, at that young age, to see this guy, my daddy, talking about it. My dad didn't talk about a lot of things dealing with the war. And so Audie Murphy, to me, and I think to my brother Jerry, became a major hero to us. To me, and I love sports, Don Meredith was my guy. Everybody probably knows Don Meredith. John David Crow, who I worked for, the Heisman Trophy winner from Texas A&M, another legendary guy back in that time period. Doak Walker, who won the Heisman. Those were guys that, we looked up to, and Audie Murphy fit right into that group. And my dad, I think, was more proud of Audie Murphy being a Texan than anything else. Now, my talk tonight is titled The Mud, the Blood, and the Beer, Italy, 1943. And that's not a Johnny Cash song, okay? But it's a fine focused look at a certain time period in World War II that I wanted to find focus in on, where you can look into one part and not a massive part of things. Now, you didn't mention all of my coaching, but I coached for 33 years. That's a long time. And during that time period, I love football. It's in my DNA. And so anytime that I speak, and you're going to have to bear with me, but anytime that I speak, whether it's to this group tonight, whether it's about my faith in Jesus Christ, whether it's about football, whether it's about anything about my books, I have to tell a football joke. Because there's not a lot to joke about in World War II. So I'm going to start with a football joke, and let's see how that goes, then we'll go from there. But several years ago, and this guy right here, Mark McDaniel, who used to be the head coach at Van Alstyne and Mount Pleasant, was with me. We were playing a football game at the end of the year at Allen High School. Everybody knows where I think Allen is. And it was for the district championship. And if we won it, both of us were undefeated, we're the champions. And we had an all-state quarterback about 2 or 3 games before get injured. Lost him for the season. And we brought in the backup. Well, the backup was playing really good. So we got to this final game, and we go in there, and in the first quarter, the backup goes down. So, man, you don't have 3 quarterbacks in high school, but we had a third guy. He goes out there, and he keeps us in the game. And it's tight. We're down by 4 points, and he goes back, and he throws this deep pass down to the 1-yard line. We call timeout. 3 seconds to go, down by 4, and my third-team quarterback's hurt. Now, nobody has a fourth-team quarterback. I did. I looked down at the end of the bench, and there's Billy. Billy's a freshman. He is so young, he doesn't even have a hair under his arms. He is totally immature. And I got him up just to experience the game. I just wanted him to sit around and see how his game was played. When we get Billy, I said, Billy, come down here. And Billy doesn't want to look at me. He doesn't want any part of this stuff. So I said, Billy, come down here. Well, he gets up and dang, he trips over his helmet. Down he goes. And I figured he's injured now. But he gets up, and he comes on over it, and I put my arm around him, and I swear it's like this. And my heart's beating like that, and his is beating like that. And I said, Billy, go out there, and all you got to do, son, and he's just looking at me, his eyes are about that big. All you got to do is secure the snap, which is the first thing quarterback does, and hand it to the tailback. He'll score, and we win. We're the champions, and you're the hero. Can you do it? And I'm telling you right now, Billy, I don't know if he can do it or not, but he's looking at me like, no, Coach, I don't know. I said, get out there and do it. Secure the snap. Boom. Here he goes. He's headed out there. When he gets to the hash mark, and he turns around, and if you've ever seen a deer in lights, his eyes are now about this big. And I'm thinking, oh, my gosh. I said, Billy, get out there. He went to the right huddle. He got our huddle. He goes in there, and I'm watching him, and he's doing this. And I said, what is he doing? He's introducing himself to everybody in the huddle. He doesn't know anybody. So I'll get up to the line of scrimmage and run the dang play. We'll win it. We're the champs. Well, they break the huddle. And good for us, he lines up behind the center. And he lines up, and does everybody know what an audible is? Anybody not know? This freshman, who has never played a single play, has never even been in a practice with us, looks over his left shoulder, then he looks over his right shoulder, and then he goes, blue 32. And I'm going, no, blue 32. No. Snaps the ball, hands it to the fullback. Guy walks in for the touchdown, and I'm going, yeah. Well, here he comes. And I mean, he is fired up. He's jumping and running. He runs right over to me. He says, Coach, do I get a letter? Played one play. I said, son, you can have the whole damn alphabet. But why did you call 32? He said, well, Coach, I looked over my left shoulder and the tailback was 14. And I looked over my right shoulder and the fullback was 21. So I called 32. And I said, well, Billy, I'm glad you called 32, but 14 and 21 add up to 35. And he looked at me and he said, you know, Coach, if I was as smart as you, we wouldn't have won that game, would we? I treasure Billy. Well, I'm excited to be here, and I've had the opportunity through the years to speak all over the country. I mean, from California to Virginia, from Las Vegas to Mexico City, and so many places in between, I don't even remember. But very rarely do I get nervous. But I'm nervous tonight. Now, I was really nervous this morning at A&M Commerce talking to Generation Z, but I'm very rarely nervous. I'm nervous tonight. Mainly I'm nervous tonight because there's more people like Skipper, and thank you for getting me up here, Skipper, more like Skipper, they know more about my subject than I do. And so I'm going to talk about something that they know more about, and that makes me a little nervous. And then from a personal note, and I hope you'll bear with me with this, again, this has nothing to do with World War II, but something very personal to me. Back in January of 2022, I turned 75. And I didn't take a single pill, had never been in the hospital a single day, worked out, had just gotten my new book, Private in the Texas Army, and I was so fired up, I was invincible. And then suddenly I caught COVID, back in the COVID time. And within about a week, my wife, Jamie, who, if you see this young lady, beautiful lady in orange back here, that's my wife. She had to rush me to the hospital in early a.m. And they did surgery. And they told her if she hadn't got me there at the time she did, I wouldn't have seen the sunrise. Well, I'm like any man. I'm not going to stay in the hospital. I want out. So the next day, she walks me, and I'm ready to get out of there, but suddenly, blood clots attack my heart, my lungs, my kidneys, and my brain. And I die instantly. I mean, I'm dead. I died 3 times in this short stretch. And I want to tell you, anybody here 70 years old? Any 70-year-old people? Be proud of it, okay? 65, 70. If you ever go to the hospital, and this is the best advice I'm going to give you the whole night. If you ever go to the hospital, have an advocate that loves you. Because if you don't, you're just a number up there. And so Jamie, she wasn't going to let me die in some little small room in Sugar Land, Texas, in that hospital. And she fought for me. And the reason I'm standing here now is because my wife fought for me, and there was a loving God that spared me. Well, I was taken from there. I was in a coma, actually 2 years ago today. I was in a coma for a week or so. I was in ICU for weeks, and I was in the hospital for 116 days and had 5 surgeries, major surgeries in 10 months. And it was very eye-opening. Well, the doctors told my wife and me that I was a miracle, that blood clots attack those parts of your body, you don't survive. But I was a miracle. But I want to tell you what, we all know where miracles come from, right? They don't come from man. When you're dying, you're not tough and all that. God gave me those miracles. He kept me here, and with the help of Jamie fighting for me on earth and God looking down on me, I'm here tonight. Well, I've been asked 1,000 times, what did you see? Wouldn't that be the normal question? You know, when you die, everybody sees bright lights. I didn't see any bright lights. Well, did you have an outer body experience? You know, where you're looking down on you? No, didn't have that either. Well, did you see St. Peter? No, I didn't see St. Peter. Well, what about that elevator that goes up or one goes down? No, I didn't see that. But I tell you what, I saw enough that my belief in Jesus Christ was solidified. And I'm going to tell you right now that and most of you don't know me, but if you hear me, when I say something, I mean it. I saw a lot of things. And I'm telling you, there's a heaven and there's a hell. I saw them. And my next book will probably be on that. So when you do go to the hospital, make sure you 70-year-old people and 60-year-old people, Generation Z, Z. I told them, I said, you need to think about this in 2060 and 2070 because they'll be at that point. A whole unique generation. I loved coaching football. I really did. And when I retired from UCLA, I found out I love writing. And over the past 20 years, I've written more things than I really actually coached football games. Different things, books, stories, whatever. And I found out I love writing. And I've had 2 books published in that time period, A Private in the Texas Army, which is the one about tonight, And then Ever Remember, which for you ladies you might enjoy, it's about my grandmother as a junior in high school, built around her diary in 1913, 1914, and what those kids did back in that time period. Great look at that. And then I've written one book on Sulphur Springs football, which is self-published it because Sulphur Springs is the only place that's interested in that. Other people don't care. But anyway, Greenville's in it. The first game Sulphur Springs played was against Greenville in 1914, Paris in 1924. So those three I've done. But tonight my talk is about the mud, the blood, and the beer, Italy, 1943. And it's centered around my dad's diary. Now, generals kept diaries, but they kept diaries basically, and I'm sure the guy spoke last time will disagree with me, to see why themselves after the war. Privates wrote diaries to talk about what they went through each day, the hell that they faced. Generals wrote diaries about mass groups of people, battalions, divisions, armies, and casualties really in a very casual way, just numbers. Privates wrote diaries about individuals, and that guy in Company B, 3rd Platoon, 2nd Squad, stepped on a landmine and was killed, and how they felt about it at that time. And so my dad's diary did survive the war. Generals kept their diaries behind the lines in a warm house or in a snug tent, usually guarded by some non-com that was glad he was off the front. And privates had their diaries in a backpack in a wet foxhole or sleeping on a frozen ground or in some leaky tent. And like I said, my dad's diary did survive the war. Now in the handout that I've given you, there's this page right here, this page here. And what I'm going to talk about tonight was just this 4-month time period. And on the left-hand side over here, I have all the 111th, and I'll talk about that in a second, 11th engineers that were either killed or wounded during this 4-month time period. And the guys in red, of course, were all killed in action. So this group here, and the one thing my dad emphasized on me, and he didn't talk about the war a lot, but one thing he emphasized to me was the infantry. Now, the infantry paid the price. The infantry were the ones that went in and did, the engineers did, and they came in basically after or before to get mines and build roads and that, but the infantry did the fighting. And what I have over here on your left, and the reason I have it over here, is I want you to see those names. I could go into the engineer World War II documents, and all of them were listed, the names and what happened to them. Now, they haven't been compiled like I've done in my book. That's the first time that's been done. You couldn't do this with the infantry. So if you had someone that was kin to you in the infantry, you can't do this. You can't find this kind of stuff. Too many of them were killed. Too many of them were wounded for the after-action reports to include them in it. And my dad made the comment, and it's in his diary too, that the infantry was the real heroes. So now I'm spending most of my time tonight talking about the 111th Engineer Combat Battalion, because you can't do what I'm talking about tonight with the infantry. But I want you to remember, as I talk about this, that the infantry were the men that fought the war and did the war. In 1940, October 1940, all over America, American youth were trying to decide what to do. There was a draft coming. And in October 16th of that month, they had to go and register for the draft. And there was a lot of misconception about what was going on around them. How long would you have to serve? What would you have to do? So on October the 22nd, less than a week later after my dad had already registered, he and a bunch of guys from Sulphur Springs decided to load up in cars, drive through downtown Brashear, you know how that thing goes, over here through Cumbie, downtown Cumbie, because there wasn't any Interstate 30 to zip over here down, and they joined the Texas National Guard. The Texas 36th Division is what it was. And there were simple reasons for this. One of them was the money that you mentioned. It wasn't much, but they got a little. But the main thing was they couldn't be drafted. And the second thing was they were told they only had to serve 1 year. So they were guaranteed. It wasn't some misconception of how long they would have to do it. And then they got to wear these new uniforms back home where they showed their girlfriends and all that, the pride in their country that they had. Well, regretfully for them, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had different ideas. And on November the 25th, he mobilized the Texas National Guard into the regular army. And the Texas National Guard 36th Division became the 36th Infantry Division. And my dad became part of the 111th Engineer Combat Battalion, Company C, for the rest of the war. And the year was gone. They were in for the duration. So all that planning didn't go anywhere. Well, now every football team, I coach football again, has an emblem. The Cowboys have the star. It may be bent a little bit now by Green Bay, but they do have a star. The Chargers have a lightning bolt. The Longhorns have a longhorn. Well, the infantry divisions were the same way. And the next thing you have in your book is a T-patch. It's a picture of what they wore on their shoulders. And this was the emblem. Every division had their own emblem. And this T-patch was originated in World War I when Oklahoma and Texas National Guards were combined. And they went over and fought in World War I, but they couldn't come up with an emblem that they really wanted. And in January of 1919, right after the war had ended, they selected this emblem. And this emblem stands for, the arrowhead stands for Oklahoma, because it had been the Indian Territory. The olive drab T stands for Texas, and then the light blue, and it's really lighter than what you have in your picture, is the infantry branch color of the military. So each thing had meant something to what they were doing. Okay, now they're mobilized. So what do? Well, in September of 1940, knowing this was going to happen, they started building a military base, Camp Bowie, down by Brownwood, about 2 or 3 miles outside Brownwood. And originally it was like 60,000 acres. They had 2,000 for the infantry, had 8,000 for infantry training. They had 23,000 for an artillery range and about 28,000 for maneuvers for them to go through stuff. So in late December 1940, early January 1941, all these guys from Hunt County and all over Texas loaded up, and these poor Northeast Texas boys who thought they were going to spend just 1 year saw that dashed, and they moved down to Camp Bowie. Not like with anything you do when you first start doing it, I call it green and growing. You're excited. And they were excited about getting this thing going and learning and being, we weren't in war yet, we're still almost a year away, learning about what was going on and how to do it. So they train in Camp Bowie from January all the way around to September. Train. Then in September of 1941, they went halfway across Texas over to Louisiana to join the Louisiana Maneuvers. And the Louisiana Maneuvers was the largest peacetime military war game ever. 19 divisions took part in it. Well, then they returned the next month back to Camp Bowie. Well, what happened? December, war breaks out. Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. Now these guys are ready to play. They're ready to go. But now more training. They're moved from Camp Bowie halfway across the United States to Camp Blanding. And they're in Florida. And they're there, and now they're more frustrated than ever. They thought they were going overseas. But in the Army's defense, there just wasn't enough transportation to get everybody across the ocean. So the training continued. Now they're over a year into their training, and they haven't even got into any action at all. And of course, that's what they want to do. They want to go out and defend our country. Well, from Camp Blanding, they moved to the Carolina Maneuvers, which was a lot smaller. And then from there, that was in July of 42. From there, they moved their last spot, and that was up in Camp Edwards on Cape Cod. And that's where they settled in. Well, by now, you can imagine the frustration and the anger. And all they've done is just work out. And while they're there, 5 times, they don't leave until April, early April, 5 times they're told to get ready. They're getting stuff ready. They're going overseas. It's time to go. They're writing their parents. 5 times it's canceled. So now they're ripe and rotten. They dang sure aren't green and growing. Well, at the same time period, my dad, during that stretch, joined as a private, and he moved up very quickly in rank. He moved up to a staff sergeant. And in May of 1941, going back while they were still moving around, he was picked along with 5 other engineers from the 111th Engineers to go to Camp Belvoir in Virginia to train at a engineer training school. Only 6 of them were picked. He was being prepared to be an officer. And they were there for 12 weeks. They learned everything from A to Z you could about preparing for war. Most of it was about engineering mechanical machines and motor vehicles and that type of stuff. And for his chagrin, The first obstacle course the Army did started 1 month before in Fort Belvoir. So he didn't enjoy that too much. But he got that in. So now he's ready to be an officer. He's not going to be a private in the Texas Army. He's going to be an officer. Well, now they're in Camp Edwards, again, frustrated. You can imagine. I relate it to a football player. You guys that played in the 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe in the 80s, you go in, you start 2-a-days or 3-a-days, back when football was real. Now you got one practice or something. You go in and you are excited, and then you work out, and you work out. And we had those old suspension helmets, and you get the heck knocked out of you. And we called it salt tablets, no, not salt tablets, a sauce. They put it in your nose. It was a salt-smelling deal. And they'd wake you up. Now you've been a concussion protocol for 2 weeks. You were out for 2 minutes, and you went back into the game. And they had salt tablets, no water. And you're going through this, and you're going through this, and then finally, the ball game. Friday, we're playing, ball game. And you get up there, and Friday morning they tell you, game's canceled. Time to go back to practice. More salt tablets, more of that smelling sauce, all that kind of mess. So you can imagine the mood. Well, now we'll jump back to Camp Edwards. A convoy left Camp Edwards to go to Boston. And they were going to go down and carry some equipment down there for future transportation overseas. And Dad was in charge of one of the trucks. Well, they got down there, and I set the mood to the football because I want you to understand their mood. They got down there, unloaded, and then as they turned to come back, my dad and this group he was with decided to go see Boston. They went in, they wanted to have a couple of beers and just get out. They've been on the camp. I'm sure they had more than a couple of beers, I guarantee you that. But they were only about 3 or 4 hours late getting back. But as it would be, the lieutenant in charge met the truck at the gate. This lieutenant my dad hated. This lieutenant hated. And my dad had just taken him in a card game about 2 weeks before for some big bucks. So this guy is just ripping into my dad because he's a ranking soldier. And the rest of them kind of disappeared. And believe it or not, I didn't know the whole story, but 60 years later, as I was putting the book together, I called one of these guys. Didn't know he was on that truck. And he told me about what happened. And he said, no, we loved your dad. He never said a word about us. None of us got any discipline at all. My dad did. But this guy just blasted him. And finally my dad says, you know what? You're a lousy lieutenant. And the guy said, Pearce, you're drunk. My dad said, I may be drunk, but tomorrow I'll be sober and you'll still be a lousy lieutenant. And the guy pretty quick-witted said, yeah, and the next day I may be a lousy lieutenant, but you'll be a buck private peeling potatoes. And guess what? Dad, here on the verge of officer school, busted buck private. Buck private doesn't even have a strap. That's that low. And he remained a buck, basically private the rest of the war. Here he was. The officer papers to go to officer school were already filed. All within a few days he would have been in officer school. And now he's a buck private. The rest of the war, he remained a private up to the very end. Never wanted to move up. And the only bars he really respected had alcohol in them and really nothing on somebody's shoulders. So that took a turn for him that was tough. Well, in April of 1943, they go overseas. Oh, before I get to that, they were told finally to load up and move again. They're going overseas. And remember, this is the greatest generation ever. Well, in every generation, I don't care what generation it is, not everybody's great. And so when they found out that the greatest generation was going overseas, the 36th Division, mamas started calling, trying to get their sons out of it. Who else? Politicians got involved to get their sons out. People of all types, anything they could do to get these kids from going overseas. Not all of them, but some of them. 3 days before they left, 75 people deserted. 35 scurried like roaches in one day. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is the greatest generation. These are not part of it. These guys are not part of the greatest generation. They just happened to be born at that time period. And the men I talk about tonight are the ones. The next map I have is this one right here. This is a 36th Division map. And what I'm going to talk about tonight is the first invasion, September 9th, 1943, Altavella and Pestum, up through Naples and into San Pietro. And I'm going to stop right there because the Rapido River and Casino, that would take a major time period to even get into that. and I'll vaguely mention it. But the 36th Division entered combat in September of 1943 in Italy, and then they would go up through Italy, up the boot. He pulled out, eventually get into Rome, pulled out, go to southern France, fight through southern France, into Germany, through the Siegfried Line, and finally into Austria. But to cover all that is impossible. I call it space focusing. You know, you can stand on the moon and you can see the earth, but what do you see? You don't see anything. You just see the earth, a blur. And that would be the same as if I talked about the entire time period. What I want to talk about, now what I want to find focus on, is a 4-month time period from September to December of 43, when these guys got their first combat through, and ladies, I'm going to talk about R&R, so you may want to cover your ears when I get there, up to San Pietro in the fighting there. All of them were victories, okay, until we got Torpedo. So that's what the Mud and Blood and the Beer is about. The next page you have has Clyde Couch on it and Truman Rice, that page right there. Under the code name Avalanche, the 5th Army was a combination of British and American troops. 36 was part of it. They landed in Italy, in the Salerno area. Now, the 36th Division landed where those color maps are. I put a pen, by the way, in every folder. I thought, you know, I never bring a pen with me, so if you want to write something down, you can do it. But the color areas that I show there is where the 36th Division landed. Now, that whole area now is known as the Battle of Salerno, and that's what you'll read about. But Paestum was where they landed. And it was here that they came ashore, and they didn't meet a D-Day, Normandy type defense. No one was really sure exactly where they were going to land. But they met enough of a defense that they immediately started taking casualties. So over the first 3 or 4 days, as they fought their way in, the infantry and the engineers suffered casualties. But on day 1, if you'll look on your map down by Yellow and Blue Beach, you see an H. That H stands for Jess Hudnall of Golly Bridge, West Virginia. And he was a married man, grade school education, miner, worked in the quarry before he came over. He was drafted in 1941, one of the first ones drafted. And Jess was a little guy, about 120 pounds. But he landed at Yellow Beach with 5 other engineers, and their job was to go inland and look for mines and through the wire so that the infantry could move in. And so somewhere in there, Jess got separated. And later in the day, when they found him nestled between 2 dead German soldiers, and the blood on his bayonet showed what happened. He had been overrun, and he had taken 2 of them with him. He's 120 pounds. He still took 2 of the enemy with him. For what he did, Jess received the Silver Star, which is the 3rd highest award that you can get. If you look over at the top of there's a little R by Red Beach. That's the man whose picture's at the top, Truman Rice. Now, Jess was the first 111th engineer to be killed in the war. Truman Rice was the second. Truman Rice was from Grand Rapids, Michigan. He had been drafted too, but he had a high school education. He was married. And so he really didn't want to come overseas. But anyway, he was part of this group that landed in the Red Beach area. And they moved inland. His platoon penetrated a little deeper than the others. And all of a sudden, they were surrounded on both sides by German tanks. And they were in the drainage ditch in between, about a half a football field apart from the other guys. And so they decided, since they didn't have the weapons to fight their way out, they'd sit there and be quiet. And hopefully, artillery or the Navy or someone would blow these things up, get them out of there. So they did that. Well, the Navy found it. And so the bombardment started coming in. Army Air Force found it. They started coming in. And one bomb, or one shell, I don't know which, hit near Truman Rice. And the shrapnel ripped his legs and his thighs apart. And he let out a loud, blood-curdling scream. And this was going to give their position away. And they got him, the rest of the engineers, and got him aside and tried to explain. And they did medical treatment too. Tried to explain he couldn't yell. Truman Rice shut up. He didn't say another word. And I can't tell you what he was thinking about. I don't know if he was thinking about his wife. I don't think he was thinking about his future. But Truman Rice didn't say another word. And then finally these tanks were either destroyed or forced back. And the platoon got ready to leave. Truman Rice had bled to death. But he did not give away his platoon's position. And that is what a great American's about. That's the greatest generation right there. Now, if you look at that map there, it has this whole area. This is where the 36 was. But if you'll go to the next map, this one right here, that you have with you, when the 36 landed on the left-hand side over there at the Gulf of Salerno, they fought their way in. And this map gives you an extension of how far they went. They got up to Altavilla. They took Mount Soprano on the right-hand side, and they fought their way up. Well, by now, the Germans know that they're there. The Germans are bringing in reinforcements. The 36 gets pounded. One part of the 36, the 143rd Infantry 2nd Battalion, they were down from 1,100 men to 206 during this contest. That gives you an idea of the casualties they were faced. And so suddenly this offense that we were on turned to defense. And they thought they would have to go and have a Dunkirk, bringing the troops off the beach, get the 36 out of there. But the 36 retreated back to this area where that big black line is, and that was the defensive line, and where the red is where my dad was. And at the bottom, just to save time in talking, you can see where the engineers were. Dad was in Company C, and what area he was. And he was right there with that big arrow. It's coming straight down into them. Well, the front was about 6 miles from the beach and about 8 miles long. So that's what the 36 was going to defend. And anybody that could shoot a gun was put up there to hold this place. Well, during this time period, his dad and they retreated on September the 13th, night of the 13th. And on the 14th, the Germans attacked. And while we were there, a shell skid, boom, by my dad. He told me about this personally, and hit a member of the 111th Company C, Clyde Couch, the other man whose picture was on that other page over there. And Clyde Couch, tall, thin guy, he was about 125 pounds too, but he was 5'11". He was college educated. He was from Vernon, Texas, and he had joined. He had not been drafted. He had volunteered in 1941 to fight for his country. And he was killed right there. And he was a man's man. Everybody looked up to him. And so that was the first time my dad had experienced death and these young men around him. And it would have an effect on him as the war continued on in the little later stages. So with Clyde killed, the whole atmosphere of these engineers changed. Now they were infantry. They were fighting. They're trying to hold that position there. And my dad wrote this. Well, for that, if you look at where the red is, there's a junction there between the Selly River and the Callery River. And then it goes up, the red goes up to this creek, La Cosa Creek, and the Callery River. That's where the engineers were that were holding the line. And that creek, if you go on a Google map and look down on it now, you can barely find it. It was really just a creek bed then, but it was the only place these guys could make a stand. And then, of course, Dad where he was and where Clyde Couch was killed. Well, my dad wrote this, and there's a couple of things through here I want to read, because I couldn't say them properly if I didn't. My dad wrote this on September the 14th, 1943. Artillery shelled us all day. Battle was pretty hot till noon. Bullets and shells zooming everywhere. German counterattack this PM. Shell skimmed by me and killed Sergeant Couch. Sniper fired on me all day. Barrage finally settled on us. Germans nearly broke through. Their tanks were all around, but our tank destroyers kept them off. A few new troops came in from the beach. We needed them. The Germans nearly drove us back to the beach. We won by a hand fight. Well, the new troops that came in were the 82nd Airborne, and this was only they're famous, but this was only their second jump ever. And they landed in that little area from the beach to the front, and they were the reinforcements for the division. So the 36th held with reinforcements. And the Germans, realizing that, they retreated to fight another day up the boot of Italy. And in the battle, the 36th Division, in their first contest of fighting the enemy, lost 1,930 men, of which was either killed, wounded, missed in action, or captured. And that took a pretty good toll out of them. Well, they moved on. The key to this whole invasion was a port in Naples, where they could bring in supplies and get troops. And Naples was the most bombed city in World War II in Italy, because the Germans had it. Who bombed them? We did. The Americans got it. Who bombed them? The Germans did. And so it caused hell from both sides. But it was the key to getting more troops in. Well, my dad wrote this, and I'm going to read this too if you don't mind. He said, this is when they went to Naples, and this is typical of any war town, even today and what's going on in the Middle East and other places. In Naples, we went down by the docks, all a twisted mess of wreckage, and the buildings for blocks around, a desolate mass of stones. People glad to see us. We stopped and they mobbed us, begging for food. We swapped C, that was rations, C for wine. Gave all our candy and cigarettes away. Pitiful sight. People fighting over a piece of candy or cigarette. They brought out their babies and begged for food. We gave everything we had away. And then he said this, destruction and disease and hunger. Civilized people gone mad. That's what happens in a town that's been bombed by both sides. Well, the 36th moved through. And at this point, they went to what would be a rest camp. And at this point, the 3rd Division, Audie Murphy's division, moved through them and continued to fight up the boot, which eventually the 36th would replace them. And so now all these guys had this break in the war, and they'd seen all this death and so forth. And so they were ready to do something. And so Naples was off limits sometimes and on limits some, but this is where they were going to go have their fun. And you can imagine, they had seen Clyde Couch dead. They're only 18 to 25 years old. Think about that. Some of them have never been anywhere. And they don't know if they're going to be the next Clyde Couch. So they're going to live life while they can. And a lot of people never heard this because none of the soldiers would write back home about it. But they partied like crazy. I have a handout next, and it's up front. And I put this in to give you an idea. It's not about the 36, but Bill Malden wrote this book up front. Bill Malden is my favorite guy from that time period. And he also did cartoons for the Stars and Stripes. And I just put a few here. I'm not going to go into detail in them to give you an idea of what it was to be in war. The top left one, his 2 cartoon characters were Willie, he has a hook nose, and Joe. And it tells you how the camaraderie they had. The one on the right tells you how important liquor was. The one below that tells you how important mail was. Remember, you couldn't get on the phone and call anybody. When these guys left their hometowns and left their loved ones, they didn't hear their voices again until they came back, if they came back. So mail was critical. And then the 4th one I put in there, and I put it in there for a reason, is Malden, who was 22 years old, would win 2 Pulitzer Prizes. When he was doing this, he always wrote about the common soldier, 22 years old now. And so it made the officers upset. And they were always trying to find something to get him with. Well, in this cartoon, I'm not going to make you search for it. In this cartoon, he wrote it, and he was accused of being drunk when he wrote this cartoon. If you look at it, there's 3 soldiers. I'm just going to tell you, there's 7 hands in it. Because he added the extra hand, they assumed he was drunk, and it gave them an opportunity to attack him. And it didn't faze Malden at all. He said this, and I believe at the bottom of your page 2. But until they send me home or send my wife over here, or until they ship over portable soda fountains, I'm going to do a little drinking now and then. And that was the way of the typical American soldier. Some overdid it, some didn't. Now at this point too, I want to mention this book. I think there's 2 major books that I love when I read at the time. One is up front, which Malden was with the 45th Division. He was wounded at the casino. He gave it a view of the 22-year-old. Ernie Powell was in his 40s, and he was in basically the same area. He gives you a look, his book is Brave Men, and he gives you a look at the situation of a little older guy, but they all focus on the ground pounder, on the GI. And then there's 3 movies. You mentioned one. The best movie I have seen on this time period is the story of G.I. Joe. Not any of the others, to me, can come close. It's black and white, came out in 1945. Robert Mitchum is in it. Burgess Meredith, remember the penguin from Batman? He's in it. He's Ernie Powell. And it follows them through the war. And in it, of all the movies, you see the drinking. You see the dying. You see the heartbreak. You see the loneliness. and you see the dang mud that they had to go through. Mud, mud, mud. And so I think that is the best movie. Now, some guy named Spielberg, is that his name, out in California? He disagrees with me. He says the best movie he ever saw was a movie called A Walk in the Sun, starring Dana Andrews. And that's also about the 36th Division at the landing at Salerno and how they fought in. But he always thought that gave a better personal look than the other one. And then there's a third one that you might want to see, and it's a documentary. You can get them all on YouTube. It's a documentary called San Pietro, the Battle of San Pietro. And it's done Hollywood style. It's only 30 minutes, but it's all action. It gives you the entire battle in a 30-minute capsule, and it's professionally done. So anyway, Bill Mauldin's a personal hero of mine with what he did. Okay, 3 weeks pass. 3 weeks pass. My dad goes back into Naples. Okay, girls. Then we went to Naples on a pass. Sure change. Streets full of people peddling wares. Drank lots of wine. Lots of prostitutes. Pimps everywhere. It is worrisome. There were the pimps hanging on your arm saying, "Senorita" or "spaghetti." Same old stuff. We had a lecture on sex hygiene. Quite a few boys caught a venereal disease down in Naples. Okay, they didn't write home about that. But at this point, when these guys would go to this rest camp, and again, they didn't know if they'd be alive a month later, a day later. And so they went by something that I read called the T rule. And the T rule is really simple. They trained on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And they partied like hell on days that started with a T, Tuesday, Thursday, today, and tomorrow. They didn't miss any of them. And that was the T rule they had. Well, beer was not the only problem that these guys had when they were down in Naples. And so the other thing popped up. The thing has destroyed armies through history and created problems. And I think it's the oldest thing in the world. The Army called it the disease that walks at night. The privates and corporals and stuff called it Cupid's itch, but it was a venereal disease. And I was amazed when I got into this. And again, most books, they won't write about this. But when I got into it and started studying it, after the war, they did a medical study. And in the United States Army in World War II, 600 soldiers a day were knocked out of combat or out of action because of venereal diseases. Now, that's not 600 every day, but 600 positions. And I thought, God, that's terrible. World War I, I didn't believe this. It's true. World War I, 18,000 a day were knocked out of action because of venereal diseases. So there was more than the Germans and the artillery and the Air Force that were bombing and so forth. But once again, the word got back to the United States. And my aunt, Audie Pearce, she wrote my daddy and wanted to know what was going on in these rest camps because the rumor was going around. And my daddy, he was going to tell her the truth, so he wrote her a letter on the time period that he was going out and doing this exact same thing. And he said this, and this is what the American soldier told the public back home. You are misinformed about what a rest period is. It is definitely not a vacation. It is used for training and reorganization. Oh, we have time to play ball, but it's more like life in the camp in the United States. Then there are passes to town or to points of interest. It is usually well appreciated as it gives us a chance to clean up and gain back a little weight and see a few movies. Now, you know the rest of the story. I never did. But that's what my dad wrote back at that time. So I think that was why it was written home most of the time. The next map is the mud. And after they moved out of the Naples area, they replaced the 3rd Division, Audie Murphy's division, who had been fighting that previous month up the boot. And my dad wrote this, and I thought it was really interesting, because usually privates don't write about other divisions. But he wrote this, that they had replaced the 3rd Division, and that the 142nd relieved the 3rd Division boys. They looked like a corpse after being in this weather and battling the Germans. They had been up there in the mud. That's why I put the mud in here. And the German artillery. I mean, you can't. The soldiers didn't fear the German soldier. They feared the artillery that was fired miles away that came in and hit on them, or the hidden mines, that type of stuff. And then the weather. These guys had fought through the worst weather, and through some German heavy defended lines. And so the 3rd Division paid the price. And when Dad came in with the Company C, they had pushed the Germans back to what was called the Burkhardt line, and the Bernhardt line, and it was a short defensive line in the middle of Italy that ran over a couple of mountains and then through 2 passes. And the main highway from Naples to Rome, which is the main objective, ran through this valley. And San Pietro, which is on this page right here, San Pietro is in the middle of that valley. And San Pietro was about the size of Wolf City, about that size there. And when the battle started in that area, the Italian citizens were evacuated, except the Germans kept most of the men there to do construction work and repair during the combat. So they lost a lot of people too. So the key to this whole thing was you go in and you're going to take those big mountains on both sides, and there's a smaller one in the middle, and then you can take San Pietro if you control the heights. Well, the first attacks, we didn't control the heights, and we lost quite a few soldiers. So eventually, the 142nd Infantry Division, the 36th Division, over on the left-hand side in the Mount Cassino area, or Mount Defensa, they took an area up there, and did not all the way up, and they came to a halt on December the 4th. And they needed help. They wanted to blow some installations, or they put machine gun nests for defensive reasons. And so Company B, 2nd Platoon, who John Bettis, the picture I have there, they started, and he's where the B is on the map. They started up the mountain. Well, there's only one trail. And the Germans knew where that trail was. And so they brought in the artillery, and they started shelling these guys. And John Bettis, Goose Creek, Texas, a Lee High School graduate, worked in the oil industry, also volunteered for the service. He was cut out and killed. He received the Silver Star, and this is what they said. I'm going to read it, and this is paraphrased. You don't hear words like this in many citations. For his dogged determination and magnificent courage, and total disregard for his own safety to get the mission completed, he lost his life. Well, I considered him one of the greatest Americans. And of all the people I studied on the 111th, this man right here was probably the most respected soldier I came across. 1 week later, December 11th, he was also the squad leader for 2nd Squad, 2nd Platoon. 1 week later, 2nd Squad, 2nd Platoon learned that his body was still on the mountain. They couldn't get to him, the grave registration people, to get them off the mountain, from where they fell. And the entire 2nd Squad, 2nd Platoon went up that mountain, to hell with the Germans, got his body and brought it down to grave registration. They honored their friend, but more than anything else, they honored a great American. That's the greatest generation, not the cockroaches that ran before they went overseas. So John Bettis, 160-pound, tough guy, he's one of my heroes. At the bottom is a picture of San Pietro after the battle. Now, also on that map that you have there, you can see up by San Pietro a little G and B up there. That's 2 more soldiers that were killed at this time, and they were both engineers. And I'm going to have you turn over one more page to this one. Again, to save time, this is from my dad's diary. And this is when they took San Pietro. After they got the mountains, the valley fell. And the infantry fought their way through and pushed them out. And then the engineers came in behind. And you can read here some of the things that these guys did, the engineers, once they went in. But on the second day they're there, and they're looking for mines and having to bury dead Germans and sadly dead Italians. These German airplanes, 7 of them I believe, came screaming out of the sky and out of the sun and caught Company C out in the open. And their bombs and their machine guns killed 2 of them. Felix Geus, who you can read about, my dad said about, and James Evans. Now, Felix Gus was a Yankee, nothing against Yankees, from Pennsylvania. He's 5'7" truck driver. Now, he had the personality plus. I mean, he could charm anybody. And so, as Dad said, he was one of the favorite people in that whole engineer company C they had. And then James Evans, sadly from Lafayette, Louisiana, Indiana, he had only been with them since December the 5th. So no one really knew him. And Dad makes mention of that, about how long he'd been there. Well, as this thing goes, just like with John Bettis, their bodies are left up in San Pietro. And right here, a local guy, Charlie Duncan, his picture's down on the bottom right, he went up and got Gus's body and brought it down to honor him. That's how the engineers felt about him. And I'm sad to say that Lieutenant Evans from Tippecanoe County in Indiana, no one knew him. And so his body remained until the grave registration got there. But this guy from Leonard, Texas, he's one of the greatest Americans ever. And I see him and what they did, and to go back and honor your people like that, it's unbelievable. So what was next for the 36th? Here we are, we've taken San Pietro. They lost 1,100 more soldiers at San Pietro. So now the Texas division is down to about 40% of what started out in Brownwood of Texans in that group. And then they would have a battle here in a few more weeks, that number would be drastically reduced. After the Battle of San Pietro, they moved forward in that red map I showed you earlier up to the Rapido River. Now, I'm not going into that battle, and I'm not going to talk about this man, but there was a certain general who craved the limelight. Would only have his picture taken from one side. Can you imagine that? Had great plans. He saw these soldiers, 36th Division, as a chess game. They were pawns. They weren't a rook. They weren't a knight. They were pawns. And in this battle at the at the Rapido River, they were sacrificed. And to a person that I've talked to, including my dad, you could never hear a single person say one good thing about this guy. Well, the division was basically wiped out, the infantry. And they came back, again, they refitted, they absorbed more troops, and then they moved out and went around and landed at Anzio, where Audie Murphy was, landed there to help with the breakout. And so when the breakout came, this general, who I won't name, in charge of it, he chose Operation Buffalo. That's what all the major generals wanted to do, Operation Buffalo, which was to cut across Italy. This is behind the German lines where Rapido River is, to cut off the German army and trap them and end the war in Italy. It destroyed the German army. Well, it's great. They're breaking out, they're moving across, and suddenly Operation Buffalo becomes Operation Turtle. He decides to turn them. He wants to be the first man into Rome. And Operation Turtle is a turn of the whole fighting force up, moving towards Rome, which is not that far away. Well, at this point, they got stymied. They couldn't move forward. And a general I will name, Fred L. Walker, he was commanding officer for the 36th Division. Everybody loved him. Everything I've ever heard about him is nothing but great stuff. He came up with a brilliant plan. He was told if it failed, he was done. And at a place called Velletri, he found a maneuver around it, broke the stalemate, and because of Fred L. Walker, this guy made it to Rome and got to ride in on his Jeep, with his picture only being taken from one side. The 36 went on through. They didn't get to enjoy Rome. And then from there, they came back, went into southern France, made a daylight landing there, fought their way up, again into Germany, and finally into Austria. When the war was over with, the 36th Division had lost the third most soldiers of anybody in the European campaign. And they had unofficially 5,974 soldiers killed. Now, my dad was very close to that. When they went through it, he was in a little town in Alsace-Lorraine on November 21st, 1944, called Arnold. And they were in, like San Pietro, they were in there looking for mines and getting ready for the move through. And the Germans threw mortar shells in. And one hit 10 feet from him, and the metal ripped his body. He went through the rest of his life with a lot of metal they couldn't cut out in his body. Like me, 78 years later, when I told you about miracles and where miracles come from, he always believed that miracles came from God and God spared him. But there's no way when a mortar shell hits 10 feet from you and you have metal in you can't get out that you survive. But he did survive. So he did not become one of those numbers. Well, when the war ended in May 8th, actually, May of 1945, my dad came home in June. And there's a picture, I guess it's the last picture in here, of he on the front porch with his mother. Dad was released in Europe in June of 45, came home, hadn't been home over 2 years, came home, and that's the first picture. It was taken within minutes after he got home. He's barefooted. Look at his feet, barefooted. I can't imagine the feeling he had inside him at that moment. Gone for 2 years and then come back to a home he had never seen. They had moved, and see your family again. So that picture, that's my favorite picture of my dad anywhere. Well, after the war, we were very middle class, very middle class. After the war, he returned to selling auto parts from place to place. Married, we hear it too often, the love of his life, but he married the love of his life, Mary Jean Thornton. Lived in Sulphur Springs with the help of the GI Bill. Bought a home at 113 Kyle Street. It's still there. And they lived there until he died in 1983. And I'm going to close with this. And when my dad passed away in 83, besides this diary, he had never kept another diary. That was enough. He never looked back. He always said that if that metal couldn't stop him, nothing could. He never kept a letter. He only kept the important papers, that you had for, I guess you had to have law-wise. But one thing, when we were going through his belongings, he left. I swear this is the truth. He left a 3.5 by 8 envelope, written on both sides, his Christian belief of what he believed in. And he wanted that to be what we found. That is the greatest generation. I want to thank you for having me here tonight, and I'll try to answer any question you come up with. Thank you. Please make it simple. I talked to Generation Z this morning. That's why my voice is about gone. And Dr. Kowalski, who's head of the history department, great professor. She blew me away how good she was. She said, I don't expect questions. There were zero. Zero. The Generation Z is not going to talk to you. Yes, ma'am?
No, I'm here to...
Oh, anybody?
Raise your hand and Christian will come too.
Generation Z in here too, eh? Oh. Yes, sir.
Is it on? Can you hear me? I pushed the button. I don't know if I got the
Well, Coach, I introduced myself earlier. I'm Jim McDonald. So throughout your research and your dad's diary, now that all these years have passed, is there anything that you either learned about your father since he's passed that you didn't know until writing a book?
Well, I actually learned about your grandfather too.
Right.
I learned about my dad. My dad was a hard man. Went through the Depression. Went through the World War. I told you we were middle class. I didn't know how great he was. I really didn't. He never talked about that. But he raised me, my brother back here, and our daughter, gave us a loving home. I think what I learned is what a great man he really was. And for him to have the attitude he had after what he came through, and again, I'm going to say the Depression. He always told me he walked to school when he was in grade school, 5 miles in the snow barefooted with a lunch pail. So if he could do that, which I know he didn't, then I can understand. So that's what I learned. And I met with his grandfather personally, and he's mentioned several times in my diary, and I found the same type of man right there, the greatest Americans.
To follow up, is there anything that, if your father was, if you were able to talk to him now, just and ask him one question, is there anything that you think you would want to ask him about his time there?
Well, from this, there's certain things about certain individuals. I'd like to know about Geus, the guy from Pennsylvania, that was the best liked guy. I'd like to know what he knew about Lieutenant Evans, just in the short time. Those are the type of questions. I was coaching. I was young, semi-young. I didn't have time to ask my dad anything about all that. And finally, right before he died in 1983, actually within one day of the Salerno invasion, 40 years after, I had started recording him. I had one 30-minute tape, and I started sending him pictures to identify people in so that I would have this stuff. And my dad passed away. And so I lost so much that he could have told me. And I think I would have been a better son. I don't think I was a great son. I had my family. I don't know if anybody else is like this. My family, my kids, and I was there if my dad needed me, but not in the way I would be now.
And the last thing, and I may be wrong on this, didn't you have your home broken into at one time and they had taken a bunch of stuff?
If you happen to get my book, I dedicate the book to two robbers also.
Yeah.
When I was coaching in Sherman, I'll just tell that real quick. When I was coaching in Sherman, and this is 1984, I took a job at Fort Bend Willow down in Houston. Of course, it's in the paper when the coach leaves. And so I was gone, and my wife was a secretary at one of the elementaries. My kids were in school. And while we were gone, I'd left, go down to Willow Ridge. While we were gone, that first Friday, two thieves broke in our house and started stealing everything we had in there. Well, a realtor came in the front door. And when that realtor walked in, they ran out the back door. Well, on the way out, everything I had, the diary, the pictures, everything was in this one satchel. And as they were going out, they noticed an old movie camera. It didn't even work. And they took that satchel, and the most important thing I had in that house, they emptied it in the middle of the floor, the diary and the pictures. And they took the dang camera. If they had taken the diary, it had been in the trash within 30 minutes. So yeah, so I dedicated one, my wife in particular, I dedicated to her, but I did dedicate it to those two guys for dropping that stuff.
It's a great presentation. The World War II Veterans Committee based in Washington, D.C., perhaps you're familiar with them. They would love to have oral, written, or any transmission of your personal story for their archives. Jim Roberts is the chairman. I can get in touch with him. World War II Veterans Committee, and they're desperately looking for these stories before these veterans die off or their children die off.
Well, thank you. It's happening very fast. Regretfully.
How often did you tear up reading the diary?
Well, I smiled a bunch from different things he did. I didn't know my daddy did. I didn't know about Naples, all that went on there. And there's more in the diary than all that. I think when he got wounded and what his reaction was from it and how blessed he felt he was to survive, and when all these other guys had not, I think that was part of it. At the end of the war, only 58 engineers of the 111th were killed in action, or killed. Some were killed by friendly fire, some were in accidents and whatever. Nothing like, again, the infantry. Nothing like the infantry. But the first time I read it, I knew it'd be a good book. I want to tell you, I sent this thing out, and I'm going to praise a man that's here real quick, if you don't mind. I know we've been here quite a while. I sent it out. When I first wrote it, it was a Pulitzer Prize winner. No one has ever written a better book on World War II, not even Bill Malden, than me. And so I said, what am I going to do? I'm going to send it and try to get another opinion. Well, I'd gone to the San Francisco football 49ers training camp, and I coached quarterbacks at UCLA, and so I wanted to know what they looked at and what they tried to find. And so they said, this is what we do. When we get into the draft, we decide who we want to draft, we send them a playbook. And they get this playbook, and in it, at the back, we put a $100 bill. Now, this is like the 90s, and a $100 bill. And when they come in, we invite them in, they turn their playbook in, and if that $100 bill is still in there, we know they're lying to us about reading the book. And so therefore, da-da-da. I sent mine off to 8, I call them professionals, 8. I put them a phone, I didn't have $100, okay? I put my phone number in the back. And Dr. McFarland, where's Dr. McFarland? Would you stand up, sir? I sent it to 8 professionals. Dr. McFarland was president of Texas A&M Commerce at the time. I didn't know Dr. McFarland, but I sent him anyway. He is the only man that called me back. One person out of the 8. He's the president of the university. He wrote me a 3-page single-space typed letter and sent me another book by somebody else I could use as an example. And you motivated me, sir. You did. And again, you didn't know me, and I really didn't know you except when we talked about hiring one coach. And you're an inspiration to me. Thank you. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sure, George.
You probably don't need that. Have you had an opportunity to travel over to those battlefields?
I've worn Google Maps out. No, I haven't. No, I haven't. No.
Did your dad ever have reunions with any of the soldiers he was with?
Have what?
Reunions?
Oh, yeah, the 36th Division had a reunion every year, and they would get together, the whole division. And he went to those things, and that's how they, kept relationships going. And then in the 70s, a bunch of those veterans, even at that time, would come by. My sister got married. We had a bunch of them come down for it. But they were a very close group, But they lost so many men. I mean, so many. Again, the infantry, I keep emphasizing the infantry, but I want to do that because I want you to know how special those guys were. Yes, Sam?
John, you had the diary. Did your dad write letters on a regular basis back to his mom?
Yeah, to his mom and to his sister.
Okay. Do you have
And she kept,
those?
she kept all the letters. That's how I knew about the rest period and what he explained, go to a few sites, a movie and all that, yeah. But, they had all that.
Yeah, I had all the letters that my dad wrote, and I knew where they were. I didn't want to read them because they're probably kind of mushy, none of my business. And finally, after we cleaned out the house, after my mom died, I did.
You read
did
them,
read the
read
letters, yeah.
Did you get the information mostly for the book from your
I'm
dad?
77, I can barely hear.
Where did you get most of the information? Was it from the diary, or did your dad talk much? This is my question, really. Did your dad talk much with you and your brother and sister about the war and his experience, or did you get it all just from the diary and he didn't really talk much about it?
He never really talked that much about it. We knew the Audie Murphy deal in '55, kind of got it going a little bit, but never in massive detail. And again, I don't think that's as much him as it was me. I mean, I had other priorities when I was younger, and I wish now I'd sat down more with him. But the diary, if I'd read the diary earlier, I would have, loved to sit down. But as far as the discussions, not a whole lot. Jerry may can answer more than that, but I don't think so. And again, I regret it. And nobody remembers the football games I coached. They don't remember those. But I remember this. And we won a few.
You talked about football a lot in this, and in the at Commerce on campus, you had your whole thing about football. I was just curious, what was the impact you think on your dad's story and knowing his history on how you coached and that whole kind of story?
I think I hate the term's been used a lot, and I use it a lot, but the never, never, never quit is one thing I think my dad taught me. My dad never quit anything. And he was blessed to have this innate ability to do anything. He could build anything. He was an auto parts seller. He built an entire vacation house all the way up from the plumbing through the electricity. He could do anything. And that gave me an inspiration from the standpoint that I'm not like that at all. Like, my wife knows more about stuff like that than I do. But it gave me an inspiration of never to give up on anything. And when he said, that metal didn't stop him. He lived his life. And that's the way I feel too.
Thank you for your speech tonight. It was really interesting. My question is, after Anzio and after Salerno and Italy, where did your dad's unit go? And how did they finish out the war?
Okay. When they landed, you have the map. When they landed in Salerno or Pestum, they fought there. The Germans retreated. They went to Naples. The third moved past them at that point. And the Germans had 3 winter lines that were established. to slow the Allies down. And so the 3rd went up there and fought their way up, and the 36th replaced. And then the 36th went to San Pietro, took the Bernhardt line, got to the Gustav line, and that's where the Rapido River happened. They pulled them back. Most of the division had been wiped out. They restocked, as I said, reabsorbed. And then they pulled them out, and Anzio had already happened. But they were trapped, the Allies were trapped in Anzio. The Germans called it the greatest American prisoner of war camp in the world. Although it wasn't a prisoner of war camp, they were just blocked in. And the 36th came in and helped with the breakout. The guy I told you about changed Operation Buffalo to Turtle. They went up through Rome, and they went north of Rome for maybe 3 weeks, something like that, and then they were pulled off the lines. Came back, involved in the invasion of southern France. They landed there along with the 3rd, fought their way through France, and once they got into France, there were really no Naples. They basically fought the entire time. There's very few breaks. My dad, I believe you got a picture up there, they would get on R&R, and he went to England, saw his brother. But all the stuff that I talked about in Naples, that basically kind of came to a halt because it was constant contact all the way up. They fought up all the way to Germany, went through the Siegfried Line, into Germany, and then they took a turn and went down into Austria, and that's where they ended up. And at that point, when the war ended, soldiers could accumulate points, and the most points came home first. And that's why my dad got to come home in June. Does that answer your question? All the major battles, you can't name a major battle they weren't probably involved with. Is that okay?
Again, I would recommend G.I. Joe because it shows them walking through town after town that was totally destroyed. And the question I wanted to ask is, one of the neatest things I thought in there was the fact that they dug the holes, and your dad talked about that.
About what?
Dug holes to stay in at night.
Oh, and that's in the movie.
It's in the movie.
Yeah.
I thought, well, I'm seeing the same thing here. That's great. Any other questions? Thank you for coming. Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
This video has been brought to you by Geus. Geus is your community-owned provider for electric, internet, cable TV, and true local programming.